So let's talk about a film from a British director set in Britain with a mostly British cast about a British event that happened to a bunch of British people during their participation in the British side of World War II. That wasn't released in Britain though. The Ministry of the Gentleman Ministry, the new Guy Richie film with Henry Cavill answering the age-old question of, he keeps getting work. That's nothing against Henry Cavill, it's just an odd thing that's happening to him right now. Back to back, he's had Argyle and the Ministry of Gentlemen, both commercial and critical failures to an extent. I'm sorry, but they kind of were. And this is weird because we now have this film on Prime, didn't release in the UK, have no idea why. It's a very British film, and it's one of those films where there's a kernel of the movie that I know Guy Ritchie wanted to make, and that kernel is an interesting, fun, clever, reverent film. A cool movie that's just enjoyable. Unfortunately, it is just a kernel. The full film is not what it should be, or clearly what Guy Ritchie wants it to be. It's not as smart as it thinks it is. It's not as pretty as it thinks it is. It's not as slick as it thinks it is. It's not as well edited as it thinks it is. But it's still relatively enjoyable. I think the biggest grievance of all of those is how smart the film thinks it is, and it's actually easily the most annoying thing about the film. The dialogue is so wanna be slick, wanna be smart, without being self-aware enough to know that it's not actually being very smart. There's a lot of quips and one-liners like bouncing off of, characters, like bounce, 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 bounce. It has the delivery of like a modern day interpretation of a Hitchcock film. I studied Hitchcock, and his delivery, his like line delivery was always like very bouncy, like, oh, see, you think you can see, but you're not seeing through the trees. Oh, I'm seeing through the trees, just not through the bushes. Oh, I burned your bushes down like your sister's bush last night. They think it's very bouncy. I think Guy Ritchie thinks it's very bouncy and like, oh, I said this and then I retorted with this witty retort, and it never fully feels that way. It never feels as though that is truly emerging and happening in the way that he wants it to. I don't attribute this to the performances, though I don't think the performances really from anyone were particularly that great or groundbreaking. I think probably the strongest characters here are the like beautiful lady. I think I'm gonna get this wrong, but Ella Gonzalez, and I'm not gonna try to say the name of the German officer, but those two I think were pretty good. It was great to see the guy from Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Dune in something, but that dude just makes me happy. I like seeing him in movies. Do I think he's the strongest actor in the world? I don't know. He always strikes me as someone who would be better in like art housey films than the sort of mainstream thing that he's doing currently. But still, he's fine in it, and he's a likable dude. He's a very likable dude. Henry Cavill, I dropped a little burp in there. Henry Cavill plays Henry Cavill, a very British Henry Cavill, or Cavill, or however you pronounce his name. As per usual, as is always the case with him, there's no stretching, there's no reaching for anything particularly big. I'm not trying to throw shade on Henry. I'm not trying to throw shade on the guy. I'm sure he's a nice dude, and I like a lot of the stuff that he's in. I just don't think he ever makes a real attempt to like reach for anything particularly strong in terms of performances, and I think that's definitely the case here. He just plays like a pleasant British chap. I mean, the rest of the cast just essentially the same. They basically all play the same character, but like various different variants. In terms of the core crew, the rest of the cast, they're like smart talking cheeky British folk, but not in exactly the same way as that core crew, but still it still all feels very samey. The whole thing feels tremendously samey when everyone is playing exactly the same part, and it makes it even more interesting given that the dynamic is sort of a like pseudo Guardians of the Galaxy dynamic with the crew, where it's like, here's the tough guy, here's the smart guy, the planning guy, here's the explosive guy, here's the team leader. And I know that it seems like wrong and derivative to pin that to Guardians of the Galaxy, but unfortunately that's popularized that style of film recently, and it definitely feels as though an attempt has been made to capture some sort of spirit in that vein, particularly when, like I said, the film tries so hard for like smart, slick delivery, and that also extends to the like physical performances as well. Everything everyone does is very like second nature and bourgeois, and I don't know how to describe it, like very effortless. Everything everyone does is very effortless, and there's this like thing that happens where, you know, a character sort of effortlessly shoots like 4 dudes, like guns 4 dudes now, and you're like, wow, okay, so that's the guy to whom it's not even an issue. But then you learn that every single character does the same thing over and over again. There are shots that feel as though they were just repeated, but just in different locations, where characters like carrying their guns at their hip and just firing without even looking. That happens over and over again, and I think that's a good amalgamation of like exactly how samey these characters are and how they all behave. In terms of the story itself, I think it's a relatively interesting story. I think the strongest thing about this film is that it is light-hearted in tone. It is a sort of like a stab at a like Tarantino style film, which is, you know, part for the cause when it comes to Guy Ritchie. You know, it's dealing with fairly heavy subject matter, but it's dealing with it in a kind of sort of tongue-in-cheek, light way, and it is enjoyable. By the end of the movie, you will potentially have had a good time. It's not a bad movie, and it's not a waste of time. It's definitely a movie that I would recommend watching if you just want to watch like a popcorn flick and, you know, just chuck it on, you've got nothing better to watch, then yeah, sure, go for it. But for anything deeper than that, you're probably not going to get it. The cinematography is not particularly impressive. A lot of the shots feel very flat, particularly by today's standards. It feels odd. And also, I think it's even weirder given that the editing would suggest a stronger cinematography. I don't know how to describe it. Like, the editing in this film would definitely suggest like heavier uses of deep focus and close-up shots than what we get here. It's very like fast and rapid and slick, and well, attempts at being slick, and yet you're given a bunch of like long shots and, you know, medium long shots and stuff like that, and it just doesn't feel right in terms of cinematography there. The soundtrack is great. I love the use of like Western soundtracks in this film. I think that's really fantastic. The pacing, pretty good. Yeah, the pacing's pretty good. And the characters, like I said, they all make a very strong attempt to be likable. There's a lot of handshaking and man hugging and stuff like that. It's definitely an attempt at a Guy movie, let's say that. But that's what you get from Richie. That's what you get from Guy Ritchie. Anyway, let's throw a score on this. I know it may seem mean, but that's an average score. It's okay, it's an average score, it's an average movie, doesn't do anything that we haven't seen before or anything particularly groundbreaking, but it's fine. It's a fine film, and like I said, give it a shot if you've got nothing better to watch. It can be enjoyable, and that's The Ministry of Gentleman Ministry.
The PlayStation is only $149, and you can also get leading titles.